Good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS Computer Security Seminar here from Purdue University. Our speaker today is Professor Masouda Bashir from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. She is a Purdue graduate, both at the bachelor's degree level and at the PhD level. And yeah, she's got it all covered right here. And so coming back to campus, actually took one of her first CS classes from Professor Spafford. So she knows the campus well, and today is speaking about online privacy agreements. Is it informed consent? Something that we all have a part in. Masouda?
Okay, thank you, Randy. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. It's a special honor to be back to your alma mater. So yes, the receptionist asked me if I knew the campus, and I said, I think I do as of 5-6 years ago, but there's always new buildings and new places to see. So I'm very glad to be here, and I look forward to the next 45-50 minutes to be sharing my research with you guys. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the kind of research I do. I have a very diverse background of computer science, mathematics, and psychology. So kind of one of those people that wanted to do social science and technical sciences. So I kind of combine all of them together. And one of my research area is really privacy and information technology. So that's one aspect of my research. I also look at trust and automation, and I look at human aspects of cybersecurity. So again, my research is trust, privacy, and security of information science, information technology from a human and social perspective. So those are the topics that I do research. So I asked the organizers, what should I talk about when I come here today? And privacy was something they were interested in. So I'm here to report on a recent survey and research study that I've done in this area. To give you a little bit background, I'm sure as you all know, privacy is a very complex topic. I actually teach a class on privacy and technology on our campus, both at a graduate level and an undergraduate level. And you know, when we go through the literature and when you think about privacy, not just online privacy, but even personal privacy, it's hard to define exactly what we all mean by privacy, right? There's cultural differences, there are individual differences, and it's just a very difficult concept to understand, define, and even work in that area. And then when we talk about online privacy, I think it becomes even more difficult. And there's different notions of privacy, right? There's a lot of literature and scholarly work from philosophers and psychologists and sociologists and computer scientists as well about the notion of privacy, right? Some sees it as a negative freedom. You should be only given the privilege to have privacy if you're a well-behaving citizen or something like that. And if there's any kind of suspicion, then you don't deserve to have privacy, that kind of thing. There's also a secrecy paradigm, right? You only want privacy if you have secrets, and kind of a negative type of thing. So there's a lot of work that looks at privacy from these perspectives. And I spend a lot of time looking at these conceptualizations, these notions, looking at the different paradigms that are suggested and studied and researched in this area so that I can kind of guide my research from that kind of theoretical work. Another paradigm that is often discussed is the invasion paradigm, right? And that's with privacy violations, an invasion of a specific interest, right? You're invading something because it's for the betterment of the society or for the security of the country or something like that. There's also another inaccessibility. Privacy is where the subject is inaccessible to others. So that's one way of looking at it. And privacy viewed as constitutional and human rights. So there's a kind of new movement that is going on in the US as well as other parts of the world where people are saying privacy is really a human right in that we deserve to have some privacy. And that certain countries actually have privacy in their constitutions, so it's a little bit easier for those countries to have laws and regulations around it. In the US, we do not have the concept of privacy, or at least the word privacy, in our constitution. So that is one of the challenges that we have at hand. So we try to borrow from other constitutional rights like freedom of speech and the Fourth Amendment and other things that we try to understand privacy from that perspective. And there's lots of different scholars that it works in this area. Again, philosophers, law professors, a scholarly work like Professor Solivo, Daniel Solivo, who's done a lot of work in conceptualizing privacy, especially when it comes to information technology, online privacy. He's written a lot of books and papers and scholarly work, so I look into his work again to guide my research. There's contextual integrity. Helen Nissenbaum, who's a philosopher at NYU, she's written some books and looks at privacy from a contextual integrity, saying that information is okay to share when it's given in a particular context. Once that information is taken out of the context, that's when it becomes problematic, and we need to worry about that and research it from that point of view. There's also the right to be left alone. So this particular conceptualization came about over 100 years ago. So when you think about technology and privacy today, it's not something that we just started pondering on or debating. This started a long time ago. And this particular first piece of documentation that we have that debated the right of privacy for individuals. And believe it or not, this came about when portable cameras were first introduced, and people were wondering if if their photos and images were taken out of context and published in a way that was not in their favor. And there were some law scholars that were debating it in the courts and figuring out. And what they referred to it as the right to be left alone. So. Again, a lot of these conceptualizations are things that I teach in my class, and I think we need to really look into these to guide our work, even if we're looking at it in today's society, in today's online environments. And then, of course, there's decisional privacy, physical privacy, proprietary privacy, informational privacy. My focus is information privacy, so that's where I do my work and my research on. So privacy research background, as you may know, if you've done some work in this area, in the US we don't have a lot of regulations or laws that really specifies exactly what we can or cannot do online. The only thing that we have that guides some of this is the Fair Information Practice, which has been developed in the 70s. And we use that, a lot of industry, a lot of markets use this as a guideline to regulate on their own what kind of information they're collecting, how they're disseminating it, and things like that. So some guidelines that are particularly specified are things like you have to give customers a notice when you're collecting information about them. You need to give them a choice and have them consent to giving this information to you and for you to use it. Access to data, participation, data integrity, security, these are the kinds of things that FIPS, the Fair Information Practices, guides us to do and requires industry or other entities where they collect data on you to do at least follow some of these guidelines. And mostly in the US, number 1 and number 2 are the only ones that are usually practiced. That's why you get a little screen that tells you, do you want to agree with our terms of service or not, and you have a choice, or at least so-called choice, which I'll get into in a little bit. And then the consent is, again, that agree or disagree, but the notices, when you get from your bank, those letters that comes in the mail that says, here's our privacy policies, and most of us probably don't know exactly what they mean by those. So the problem is, again, that FIPS were developed for the technologies that were around the 1960s, 1970s. We haven't really updated some of these. So, and as you know, technology has changed a lot. Information sharing has changed a lot in the last several years. So, again, this is one of those guidelines that we are using in the US. So I started looking at privacy in the cloud because, again, it's an infrastructure that's used a lot in the US and used for social networks and a lot of the computing that we do today, right? And one of the things that is done is that a lot of cloud providers assume that they are getting their customers, the participants, consent when they come to get a service from them by just having those are terms of service and privacy agreements that most of you, I'm sure, have seen at least. And so by clicking accept, they assume that you've given them your consent so that they can use your information, collect that information, do what they need to do with that information. And one of the things we did in our previous work that we've published is that we actually looked at the privacy policies in terms of service for some of the top cloud providers and dissected those privacy policies, those 10, 15-page boring things that I know most people don't read. We actually researched and got this information, looked at them to see what kind of information is contained in there, what kind of rights are given to consumers, users, and what kind of rights or privileges are given to the companies, to industry. And we found, we looked at like terms of service from 12 companies, privacy policies from 19 companies, And we found from that previous research that companies generally include similar provisions in their policies, right? Some of the same language, same kind of vague, not binding type of information. They also tend to be more vague about control that consumers have over their data versus what they can do with the data. Companies also rely on advertising revenues to provide free or cheap cloud services, often include a number of provisions giving the company more options for what to do with customer information. So, and again, you need to really read these and dissect them and understand them to see exactly what it is that they're asking you or promising you. So overall, our findings indicated that there was a need to assess consumer choice and informed consent. So we went back to the very basics and said, okay, we know that people don't read privacy notices and policies. And a lot of other research has shown that, right? There's a lot of surveys that shows that people just don't read them. And so we went back to say, why aren't people reading them? And what if they read them? Will they understand some of the language? Because, when I was working on this, I had a postdoctoral student from law school, a couple of other graduate students. We were looking at this, and it was kind of difficult for us to even understand exactly what was contained, what was being promised, what was guaranteed. We just couldn't really understand. We said, what would the average consumer know about these kind of things, even if they were reading these kinds of things? So that's what kind of motivated us to do this recent research project that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So we were looking at consumer choice and informed consent, right? These are the kinds of things that came out of our previous research. So again, the principle of informed consent is that the process by which a fully informed user participates in decision about his or her personal data. And this is, again, a conceptual paper that was written that we borrow from to test some of our hypotheses. And there are 5 principles of informed consent that is typically assumed and given. One is that you have to give disclosure, right? Exactly what are you going to do with this data? Why are you collecting it? You have the people that participate in these types of data collections, they have to understand and have some level of comprehension about what it is that why is the data being collected, what is it, how is it going to be used, what is going to be done with it, those kinds of things. There's also the aspect of volunteerness, right? We don't want to really coerce anyone into participating or giving their data. So they need to have this choice of whether they want to participate or not. There's also a principle of competence. Really, are you able to give consent? Do you know enough information? Are you competent to do this kind of thing? And then agreements, of course, where you sign on the dotted line, and most of the online services translates that into accept. So when you click accept, it is kind of your signature agreeing to live with those terms, and basically you're legally binding with those conditions that they have set for you. And feel free if you have questions. At the end, I will also have some time for questions. So again, informed consent. There are several problems with the approach that make informed consent a false reality, right? So we were looking at this. First of all, you only have 2 options, right? You're usually not given a third option. You either take it or leave it, right? You either accept or we don't want you as a customer. Take it or leave it kind of thing. So we really don't think that is really voluntariness if we're looking at the informed consent principles. And we wanted to test that in our survey and our research. The policies are also long, dense, and written in legally language, right, which is hard to really comprehend, as I said, with even some higher degrees and lots of knowledge in this area. It's also difficult to compare the policies of different companies, right? Amazon may have its privacy policies in one way, written in a certain way. Yahoo may have it in another way, Google in another way. So as a consumer, if you're using these different services and you're trying to understand the privacy policies in terms of service, it's difficult to know exactly where is this information about data withdrawal, for example. If you're interested in how do I withdraw my data from this particular cloud provider, how do I go about it, what are my rights? It's hard to know exactly where is that in the policy, where do you look for it, how is it written? It's different for every company. And the option for agreement only occurs once, right? You only at the very beginning say, I agree to these terms or not, and there's usually no other chance for you to change your mind or update or figure out if there are other choices for you. So our research questions were, what does the average person know about online privacy? Assuming that let's say they took the time to read these kinds of policies that are often 10, 20, 50 pages long. Even if they took the time, how much do they know about online privacy, about how information is collected, how it's distributed, how it's used, so that they can make informed choices. So we went back to kind of the basics to ask that question because according to our knowledge and the research we had done, no one else had really assessed people's knowledge. They had asked a lot of opinions about what they think should happen in an online environment, what kind of data should be collected or not, but no one had really assessed, or do people really know what kind of technologies are being used, how their data is marketed, how the internet makes money, these kinds of things. So we thought we really wanted to assess the knowledge and also ask their opinions, of course. So we had several sections. And our questions were, what do consumers stand about cloud computing, online security, online advertising, and privacy law, for example? Do consumers understand how their personal information is used by cloud service providers? These kinds of categories are what we included in our survey. And we were trying our best to keep it short, but ended up being a little bit long. And so we still had a good success rate. So again, we looked at other research findings that other people had done. Again, a lot of previous research was telling us that no one really reads the privacy policies in the terms of service. So that was, one of the things that we were asking as well. We also looked at, online behavioral advertising survey. Are you familiar with each of the following terms? So the surveys were done in a different way than we went ahead and did it. They asked if they were familiar. They didn't really ask them how the intricacies were, or what kind of knowledge they had about this. There was also other surveys that said participants classified themselves as non-readers of click-through agreements other than readers, and they classified most people as non-readers. So we knew that people don't read them, and we wanted to know why. And what if they read them? Will they make different choices based on that? So we developed a two-part survey. The first one was knowledge, and the second one was opinions. We actually switched the order online a couple of times to get more participants for each part. We looked, of course, at some demographics. We put scenarios as a third person. So if Bob is asked, Alice is trying to, explain, for example, cloud computing to Bob, what are the correct terms or something. A lot of multiple choice, so it's not very difficult. And if they knew the information, they can recognize it. We didn't have an essays or fill in the blanks and stuff. Most of them was multiple choice. And the one thing that took us the longest was to develop the questionnaire so it's easy enough at the very basic level. So we're not talking about the kind of knowledge all of you probably have about cloud computing and other things, but very basic things like, does the data reside on your laptop or computer in cloud computing, or is it stored somewhere else? Those kinds of basic features. We also asked people to do confidence rating. This was one way where we wanted to see if they are just guessing. And we know how surveys sometimes go, people participate and just click. So at the end of each section, we asked people how confident were they about the answers that they had given us. And that was one factor that we used to do our data analysis, because that tells us if people were just guessing and they happened to be right, or they actually thought that they knew and they felt good about that. We also asked a lot of opinions, questions about online behavior, and third-person scenarios as well. And this was mostly given in an academic environment, which I think has influenced our results, which I'll get to in a minute. There were 5 sections in our knowledge survey. Cloud computing was one of them, so we wanted to know about, in particular, what is about cloud computing, or what features does cloud computing have that other infrastructure computing environments may not have. Online security, right? So we asked some questions about that. For example, what are cookies and what do they do, kind of thing. And people may have heard of it, but they may not necessarily know the functionality of such things. The economic aspects of why is these giant service providers able to give you free services? How did they make their money, kind of thing. We also included a section on educational records, privacy laws, and act that's out there. It's called FERPA. The federal education system does have regulations on how educational records and information can be handled and accessed. And we thought, because we're doing our survey in an academic environment, it'd be nice to know if students in the population on a campus environment, how much do they know about this particular act that's supposed to, protect their important information. We also, as I mentioned, had some legal aspects of online privacy included, again, at a very basic level, and I'll share some of the questions later on so you can see. Again, we thought these were the main components to kind of give an initial assessment of what people really know, what their knowledge is. And we had over 700 people that participated, but again, they didn't answer all questions and didn't take all sections. So the number that we have is the 455 is when we had enough and each section was completed. We had a good distribution of males and females. We looked at things like religion, relationship status, age, and those kinds of things, just to see if there was any variations in those categories. And we had, multiple choice questions and true and false on most of them, because again, we really wanted to make this easy for people. It wasn't that something they had to memorize or study for, but basically, what do you know? And if you knew the information, you would easily be able to answer the questions. So our survey of knowledge, what we found is that these are the kind of the scores that we got. And the overall score for all of the knowledge, with all of those sections that I talked about, was 59.5. And you'll see later that actually we had a very highly educated population that took this survey. A lot of grad students, a lot of undergraduate students, and a lot of engineering students were part of this survey probably. We also tried, once we had some data, we actually tried to get it from all over campus, so it's not biased on one side or the other side of campus. So, but for cloud computing, it was a little bit more, so people knew a little bit more about cloud computing than, for example, online security. They did the best in the economics of the internet. So a lot of people knew how cloud providers were making money, by advertising, by selling perhaps their information, and those kinds of things. So we were pleased to know that people know some of those aspects. People did probably the worst actually in knowing their rights about what the law is and what the restrictions are about educational records. And that was a little bit surprising, because again, that's the most important information in an academic environment is your academic records. And we were wanting to know if the student population that was going to participate knew their rights and knew how their data was going to be protected. And the legal aspects, people didn't do as well, and we kind of were probably expecting some of that. But they actually did worse in educational records than the legal section. And again, one of our challenge was to make this really basic. Frequency of distribution for overall knowledge score, as you can see, the mean was 59, median was 62, but the standard deviation was quite high. So, depending on where maybe the education level was, or maybe what their background were, maybe that influenced their scores. But overall, still you can see it's only a 60 point, and this is in a very educated environment. And by section, again, if you can see, the overall score, cloud computing, online security, you can see that there is still some variations there, and that they really did best in the economics and worst in the educational records. For cloud computing sections, again, that they did a little bit better, so there is more knowledge out there. People perhaps knows, because now it's been around some years, so maybe that helps, and maybe more because more people are using it. They understand the way it works. Online security sections didn't do as well. Really, like, how do you protect your data? How is information transmitted? Things about viruses, for example. Those kinds of things were asked, and so again, they did somewhat well in this section. The economics of the internet, as I said, a lot of the participants did very well. Like, if they knew it, they knew all of the answers, and they knew all of the information that we were asking about. Educational record, as I said, participants performed the worst in this section. So we asked things like, what do educational records consist of? So, for example, your transcript, for example, your when you entered, for example, Purdue, and what kind of degrees did you get from here? Any other information that's not publicly available, right? So there are databases and directories that are available on the internet, and most people can access that. But other information that's not publicly available consists of your education records. How and when can third parties access a college student's education records? We had like 3 questions for that. And average people that knew that was only 57%. What rights do parents have access to their child's education records? People really didn't know exactly what the parents' rights were, and what kind of people are and under what circumstances can they access their educational records. The legal aspects, again, I had some law colleagues that were working with us on this, and we were really trying very, very hard to make this very basic, because I was also learning about the legal aspects as I was working on this project myself. Participants performed the second worst in this section. As you can see, the mean was like 48. So we asked things like, what do major US privacy laws cover? A lot of people really didn't know this at all. What rights do citizens have in regard to freedom of speech, for example? A lot of people really didn't know that. Maybe some of you here can look at some of those questions and say, well, I don't know if do I know this or not. What procedures do government agencies need to follow in order to search private citizens? So again, we were trying to use some of the very basic things that are used right now in order to regulate some of the online information that's being accessed or surveillances that are happening. What rights do individuals have in regard to accessing others' information and protecting their own? And very few people knew this. And we did have some law students participating, so I'm thinking that maybe that's where the 37% comes, but I don't know. So we also asked for opinions, as I mentioned. We had online behavior. We asked, like, how often do you use the internet? What kind of services do you use? Do you use social network sites? What other types of sites do you use? Those kinds of things to understand if there are people that use the internet at all, a lot, or just an hour a day and that's it, that kind of thing. We also talked about personal privacy, right? Some questions about like physical privacy versus online, and if they knew the difference between some of those things. Cloud service providers and then government surveillance, we asked some questions about that. We were doing this research last summer, so this was post NSA Prismora was just coming out around the same time. So we had a chance to put a few questions in there just to see what people's opinions were about those. And again, we had more females in this sample that took the opinion section, less male, but again, a lot of the other demographics were there as well. And volunteerness was, this is, for example, one of the questions we asked. Have you ever submitted information online but wished that you did not have to? And as you can see, there is a substantial amount of people, at least from our survey, that says, yes, I really didn't think I had any other choice but to submit to whatever was being asked because that was the only way to do it, right? It's not like I really don't want to answer this question. Is there another option for me? It's take it or leave it. Opt-in is the only choice. And older people are more likely to answer yes to this. There was a significant difference in age in the way this question was answered. And we had 727 people that actually answered this question. Non-readership of privacy disclosures. So again, we wanted to see if our sample we're saying some of the same things that other research has found as far as why they don't read it. So a lot of people, 36.6 says they've never read any of those things. They just click and move on. Rarely, so about more than half of our sample was saying they just don't read it. And when we said, when you visit a website that asks for your information, how often do you read the website's privacy policy? And again, the majority were saying they don't read that. That's not something they consider as part of their decision making. Reasons for non-readership. So we really, again, wanted to see if we were finding some of the same, replicating some of the findings from previous research. And 87.2 said that the document is too long. Probably some of you agree here as well. I think I was scrolling through the recent iOS agreements, and they were very, very long. I think something like 50 pages. The document uses a lot of legal terms, and I don't understand. So that was one of the things that, again, 50% of our samples said that that's why they were needed. And the bottom part, by the way, tells you previous research that was done. So as you can see, our numbers are pretty close on some of these specific things. So we see a trend, right? That people are not reading these because they're too long. They're written in a language that is very difficult to understand, and they just don't understand the content. So even if they were to read these things, how much are they going to really understand on what's being asked from them? What are they consenting to? The relevance of privacy disclosure. So we asked, have you ever decided not to use a website strictly because of the website's privacy policy or terms of service agreement? We had 707 people that answered this, and they said yes, multiple times. As you can see, 26% of our respondents said that was something that they did consider. That was a deciding factor for them. And again, we found that older people, again, age was a determining factor, that they paid more attention to this kind of thing than some of the younger one. Also, education made a difference. So people who are more educated sees this as one of the factors that they're going to consider before using an online service. And then, so they base website users' decision on privacy policies in terms of service, but it's of a smaller percentage than in the ones that don't consider this at all as a part of their decisions. We asked also, like, what types of information do you base your purchasing online, right? There's lots of online sites, you go and purchase, and it was kind of alarming on where privacy policies in terms of service are listed. So as you can see, it's the bottom two. If you look at the table, only 10% said that the contents of a website's terms of service is a deciding factor or something that they consider in purchasing something online. And the privacy policies were actually only 12%. So very few people pay attention to these. So you may argue, and part of the future research would be, what if we took these away then? Would that make a difference or not? I don't know. The appearance of a website actually fared more than the privacy policies. The reputation seems to be a big factor. So, if you've gone there before, if you know that friends and family or colleagues are using it, then that tends to be a much more trusting factor. Price difference was kind of the same as that factor, so those are equally. Familiarity with a website or company, trust in a website or company, these were the factors, but privacy policies in terms of service were not some of the main factors that people based their decision on. We also were looking at online advertisers, right? We were asking people about their opinions on what they should be able to or not be able to do. And so should online marketing and advertising companies be allowed to track consumers' online activity without asking for permission? And 11% of our sample said, yes, that'd be fine. They don't need my permission. It's fine if they want to do that kind of analysis. Another question we asked was, participate in data trade in which consumers' online activity on multiple websites is combined to create demographic profiles. And almost a third of our sample said, yes, they would consent to something like that. That's okay with them. Use of demographic profiles to display advertisements that are relevant to individual consumers. 50% of our sample said that would be okay with them. That's not something they would object. And the other one was to determine which ones are the most relevant to individual consumers, so doing more data mining or more data aggregation, those kinds of things. And 52% of our sample again said that they would be okay with that. They would approve something like this. Awareness and approval rates, common terms within the privacy disclosure of cloud service providers. We asked opinions about statements like, were you even aware that this was happening? So we thought it was important to ask, did they knew that this is part of the privacy policies or not? And would they approve if something like this was to be added or considered in these terms? And we asked things like, some cloud service providers may reproduce or modify works of content uploaded by users. And almost 30% of our sample said, I knew that this was happening, I'm aware of this kind of thing. And only 6% will actually approve it, though, if they were given a choice, right? If they can think about it and they can select whether that would be something a company can do or not, only 6% in our sample would approve that. Some cloud services may publish publicly, display, or distribute content uploaded by users. Again, a very small percentage, 12% said that they would approve. Again, as you can see, people are aware of these practices. They know that this is happening. But if they had a choice, if they were consenting actually, they probably would not approve these things. We also looked at potential demand for alternative service delivery models. So again, there's a lot of debate and a lot of discussions about, what if we were to pay for some of these services, right? A lot of people are looking at these economic models, and lots of different research is being done in this area. Lots of different models are being proposed. And, what if the customers, there's research that's been done by other colleagues that looks at, what if you were getting paid for the information, for your personal information that you're sharing? What if you had a percentage of that? What if you had control over your data and sold them to different companies and said, here, make money, but give me a certain percentage? Lots of different things are being researched and considered. So we asked, if a cloud service provider were to adopt a new policy that gives users different options for their privacy setting, would you prefer? And 72% of our respondents said yes, they would prefer that, right? They like to have options, they like to know more about, and be able to check some things and not others. They approve of certain things, not approve of other things. But they would like to get fewer features, but for increased control over your personal information at no cost. so people still didn't want to really pay. So there's a lot of research that shows that maybe if we pay $3 a month, $5 a month, $10, then maybe if companies were willing to do that and give us more privacy, perhaps that may be an approach going forward. A lot of our respondents said they still want to really have the free service, but they like more privacy, kind of the combination of both. Only 19% said that they pay a small amount, like $3 a month. So we wanted to make it a small amount. They would pay that much if they could get more privacy protections for their data. Again, opinions on government surveillance. So we asked us, do you think the U.S. government has ever collected any information? Again, a lot of these respondents were taking this after the NSA leaks and stuff, so it was a little more probably evident out there than previous to that time. And 51% of our respondents said yes, they knew that there's some kind of data collection, perhaps some use of their data from the government in some way, and so it wasn't something completely they weren't unaware of it. Which of the following best describes your opinion regarding the amount of power the U.S. government has to collect and analyze private information about citizens? And the majority of our respondents said it's too much power, and that they're using this information. In previous and future research, I'd like to probably ask a lot more detailed questions about this kind of thing, because now we have more information about these types of topics. But at the time, it was just a glance of what people consider to be okay and approve of those kinds of things. So future research directions, again, we hope and think that our research gives some direction for the kinds of things we need to do with privacy policies. We know that the current model doesn't work, right? People are not reading them. Several research studies and findings tells us that people are not reading them because of reasons like it's too long, it's difficult, it's written in legal language. So how can we modify these? Should we just, one approach is, should we scrap them because people are not considering them, they're not reading them, what's the purpose of them? Or another alternative is, should we modify them in some way and revise them so it will actually mean something and people will read them? So can we shorten it in some way? Can we make it more readable? What kind of information should appear in these policies? Should there be a standard template, perhaps, right? So that if I'm using Google's privacy policies or Amazon's or another companies, that I can go and look and figure out where, for example, data withdrawal is going to be covered, and so that I can learn and know that these are the kind of standard ways companies do it. Or the storage of my data, or third-party access to my data. If I was interested in that and wanted to know, it would be nice if there was some kind of standard language that could be used, or at least standard templates. So those are some of the things that we think future research can hopefully highlight, but we think our research and our findings has shed some light on those particular directions. Again, the awareness and the knowledge that we found in these surveys tells us that more education has to be done, right? More about online security, about online privacy. People need to know more. As I mentioned, I really think that our data and our findings are skewed because we are in an educational environment, highly educated actually. So I like to actually replicate this survey into an environment where it's non-academic to see what kind of knowledge base we're going to find. My hypothesis is that it will be lower than what we found, but until I get the data, I can't say for certainty. So, of course, revising, the materials that are online, the terms of service, privacy policies, using HCI models and methods perhaps to make this a little bit easier for people so that it's useful to them. Perhaps giving alternatives, right? Not just saying accept or cancel, but having actually somewhere in the middle so people can, freely choose what they want to share or not share. We also have to look at, policy level changes, for example, based on this. Regulatory oversight, setting a baseline for protection of sensitive data. Should that be something that we could perhaps go forward with? Regulation requiring service provider to make higher levels of protection available to consumers. Standardizing format of TOS I mentioned. So those are some of the directions, but again, I think we'd like to deploy our survey in different regions of the world. We were thinking, for example, it would be great to deploy this in China or in India or somewhere else and see if there are differences. We suspect that there are cultural differences in privacy settings and privacy policies and expectations. So it would be nice to look at some of those in the future. Of course, there's a lot of technical approaches as well, right? A lot of different things we can do with that aspect. But for this particular study, we wanted to know the knowledge, we wanted to know what people's opinions are, so that hopefully that can kind of lead our research in the future on how we are going to revise some of these things. That's all I have. Questions? I don't know how I'm doing on time. Sure.
When we go to the opinions of particularly the questions about why someone chooses to use a website, the reputation was at something like 89%, and the privacy policy in terms of, yes, that one, we're pretty low. I don't see a very good option for like a sort of casual knowledge of their privacy dealings and the way that they share information, but it could also be caught up in the reputation as well, because you might have heard from one of your family members that their Facebook profile or their Facebook picture ended up on some advertisement and they didn't want that. So I'm thinking that there might be a lot involved in reputation and a lot of casual knowledge that isn't going to be from specifically reading the privacy policy or the terms of service.
So more from personal relationships or things that matters. I think you're right, probably that a lot of that information may have been just captured under reputation. So it'd be great to, in the future, to kind of dissect that question and ask more detailed about what do you mean by reputation, or, you know, from friends, family, colleagues, what do you read on the internet, you know, how do you make this decision, how do you know about a company's reputation, what do you base it on, so.
Right, and what parts of their reputation are they talking about? Like, is it reputation for getting your products to you on time, or is it reputation for not having credit card breaches or something like that?
Right.
So there's a lot there.
Right. So that's a great suggestion. And again, a lot of this data is making us already think about the next project that we should be asking about. Yes.
I have two questions. The first one is probably very related to the previous question. In one of your slides right before this, you have some data about how people respond to, have you ever abandoned a website based only on the, this one, on the privacy policy or terms of service agreement. And it feels weird to me that only 57% said that they never abandoned the website. I would feel like the percentage would be way higher. And do you think that that could be, like, personally, I'm way more concerned about the terms of service agreement that means like it's a stronger binding than the privacy policy. So did you try to like separate these two data in this kind of questions, and like which one do you feel that people feel the most in this case?
We did try to separate, and we didn't see a big difference, at least. It wasn't significant. And so what I'm reporting here is what we found to be significant, statistical significant differences. We did ask if privacy policies were, you know, considered separately, or terms of service was more important to you. We asked the way that the question was, again, of have you ever like not just gone back? A lot. What happens, I'm assuming, I didn't ask these questions, people just give up and go back to that service because there's not that many alternatives out there. But yes, that's a good question and consideration to perhaps dissect that even further and see what is really the reason that they're not going back or going back to the same.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And the
Sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. I'll be really quick. The second question is that I personally know the founders of an Italian startup that's called Ubenda, and what they do is to try and make it easier for companies to make a very clear privacy policy on the website for like cloud services. And also, like, they make it way more readable for users by categorizing what the different access, like restriction, and what the rights are for the user. So did you investigating like this kind of like commercial products that are starting to get way important in the landscape?
Not for this particular research project. We are exactly doing some of that already. We're building some apps and interfaces and doing some more of experimental studies then when we bring people in and say, you know, we give them privacy policies based on one of those apps or some service that simplifies it and hopefully makes it more readable and more understandable, and then perhaps giving it in the regular way and see if people you know, do better in the knowledge or their opinions or their responses to those things. Like, would they accept those now that they understand it better? So yes, we are certainly going in that direction in our future research, is because there is a lot of more movement towards privacy now, more apps available. I think people are more concerned about this topic now than they were a few years ago. So
Thank you.
Yes, welcome.
what you just said anticipates my question. I remember a few years ago at a government meeting for centers that we may have attended together for a while now, somebody announced the results of some research saying that like 70% of the users or citizens couldn't care less about privacy at all. I think you are right. This may be changing because we are talking a lot about privacy. In my own areas, quite often a question like that is dismissed because people cannot, off the top of their heads, to figure out a dangerous situation. They can find out like, who needs my student data and how can it hurt me. One possibility is, I know you are concerned about the brevity of the question, and to give examples of situations and then ask whether they are concerned or not. There was one bullet on an earlier slide. Don't go there, but you didn't elaborate on it. But I had never thought about it before. Policy-based competition. That would be called policy-based competitions. I understand among providers. Wouldn't
Yes.
it be great if I was proud of my privacy policy to have a link to a place saying compare our privacy policy to our nearest competitors?
We're hoping that that's going to be a trend that may come about.
There is this insurance company with the famous girl Flo, I think it's progressive, everything is in white, and they pride themselves on giving the rates for companies.
Right. I've seen some of those commercials.
Yeah, so that kind of thing I think is very important.
Right, and that's what we're hoping in some way that the market would respond to some of these things, and because so far in the U.S. we've left the issues of data protection, privacy protections to the market, saying it's going to decide on its own, and those companies, if the customers care, if enough users care, then they will probably demand it, and then if the companies who care and can stand on that and say, I will provide you more privacy protections than the next guy or my competitor, wouldn't you like to have the same services and still have data protection, privacy protections? Will consumers make those choices and go to the ones that gives them? We haven't seen this yet, but we hope that this is something that will come out from some of this research that's happening, that people do want this. There's a desire. We're not sure exactly what they will do, because there's some research that shows that what people say they want in privacy protection and what they do behaviorally are not the same. So they say they care, but then their actions and their behavior online doesn't suggest that they really do. So we need to do more research from the SCI perspective to see, human-computer interactions, to see where is that disparity? Why is there this disconnect? Is it just because there's no other choices, or is it that other maybe more fundamental psychological factors? That's something that needs to be researched further. But yes, I think if companies offered, and even if we did experiments in labs where we perhaps wrote different privacy policies and promised more data protection, see if users would choose that over somebody else's. If the market, we hope that the market moves that way, where industry sees this as an important factor, and then they can bank on it and they can advertise that as here's what I'm giving you. If you've noticed in the last few months, I've seen advertisings from Google and from Microsoft and other companies kind of accusing each other about what they do with your data and how they use it for different purposes. That's something very new that I think isn't along the lines of what you're thinking, and maybe in a few years we'll hopefully see some more competition in that regard. Other question?
Yes, because I think we all are familiar with the example of Sony and the famous data breach of they experienced, right? And it was all over the news and internet and so on. And what actually happened afterwards was that their sales actually grew. So this, I think, indicates that the people even were buying more of their products and services. And I don't know if the privacy issue was an issue actually for them when they were buying more stuff from Sony.
Yeah,
They grew seasonally. What people, and I know you're talking about Target, for instance, moving into the holiday season, and so they grew seasonally.
But
But basically, you are right. There was no negative
Yeah.
event. I'm not going to target anymore ever in my life.
yeah, and actually, I witnessed also few experiments that you, sir, were talking about that actually were indicating that privacy isn't really an issue for some people.
Sorry,
Oh, no, it's great. This is, we have these conversations as well. I mean, that's why we really need to do a lot more research to understand this framework. Do really people want more privacy protections? If so, what kind of protections do they want? Does it matter if they find about a privacy breaching incident about a company? Will they continue to use the services? Will the sales go up or down? I mean, those are the kinds of factors that we need to look at how the trends are and learn from those. But I think there's a lot more involved in these questions, right? And like you mentioned, perhaps, is it what season is it? Are they expecting to have more sales anyway, and it just happened to be right after this breach? Or are there other more, environments just in society? What else is going on? Is there some kind of fear, security versus privacy in the environment that people are hearing about? There's all of those other kinds of factors that should be considered in the research. But I'm very interested in this area, and I will continue to do a lot more understanding this dilemma of what is it that we want as consumers. What are we willing to give up for it? Is it a price, a monthly rate, more going to companies that are going to provide it to us versus not the companies that are going to provide it? I think the consumers have a lot of power and a lot of say in this, and if they voice this going forward, we may see some changes. At least that's my hope.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.